500 soldiers. No way out. I won't order anyone, but we need a pilot. Now. The colonel's voice cracked through the war room. 3 helicopters had already gone down. No one volunteered. No one, except Captain Lauren Creed. They mocked her, called her a transport pilot, said she'd freeze under fire. But Creed didn't flinch. She flew into that valley once, then again, then 35 more times. On her final run, her helicopter had no tail rotor. It was spinning, dying, burning, and still, it flew. This isn't just a rescue story. It's the moment an entire army learned what impossible really looks like. The first sound of the day wasn't an alarm. It was the soft clink of ceramic on metal as Captain Lauren Creed set down her chipped coffee mug onto a steel shelf. Euro 425. Her day had begun 30 minutes earlier. Not because she had to, but because routine had long since replaced sleep. She folded her blanket tight against the edge of her cot. Corners squared, no wrinkles. Her boots brushed and aligned. Flight suit prepped and hanging with equal precision. She didn't do this for praise. No one was watching. That was the point. Everything in her quarters bore the mark of discipline. No clutter, no decorations, only the essentials, and one photo. It was an old image faded at the corners. A younger Creed, just out of flight school, standing beside Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Briggs. Her mentor, her first commander, and the man who taught her that flying wasn't about bravado. It was about belief. He was gone now. Syria, 2016. A missile strike no one saw coming. She never stopped hearing his voice, though. It showed up in small moments, like now, when she ran a gloved hand across her frayed flight logbook and reread his last handwritten note. Your hands are steadier than most men's pride. That's why I trust you with the stick. Outside, the base was beginning to stir. A distant hum of diesel engines, boots slapping pavement. The occasional barked order from a half-awake sergeant. Creed moved through it unnoticed. She preferred it that way. She entered the prep room to refill her canteen and heard the voices. Low, sharp, meant to stay private. She's solid, but she's not combat-proven. Logistics hours don't count when things go hot. I heard she aced sim training, but that's just pushing pixels. Come on, let's be honest. She's a quota, a political checkbox. The words didn't sting. Not anymore. They just sank into the same place all the others went. A quiet chamber in her memory where doubt became fuel. She didn't confront them. That wasn't her style. Lauren Creed didn't perform. She prepared. By 0500, she was on the flight line, running her hand down the body of her aircraft. Apache 77 Alpha. A machine she trusted more than most people. The bird had scars just like her, scratches along the paneling, a dent near the intake fan that hadn't affected performance, but was never reported. It reminded her this thing had been through hell and still kept flying. She whispered without thinking. Let's stay in the air today, okay? Back in the hangar, the tone changed. The pilots had gathered for the morning shuffle, flight rotations, resupply missions, weather updates. Creed walked in and felt the shift immediately. Conversations dipped. Eyes glanced and then looked away too quickly. She sat alone. Across the room, Captain Merrick leaned back in his chair, grinning like he knew something no one else did. You ever notice how she never speaks in briefings? He said just loud enough. Like she's afraid we'll figure out she's guessing. A few chuckles, nothing overt, nothing you could report. But the message was clear. She wasn't one of them. She was just there. But she didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes or glare back. Instead, she reached into her flight bag, pulled out her logbook, and began reviewing her notes. Handwritten, cross-referenced. Combat flight patterns, terrain assessments, emergency simulations, a decade of real-world preparation, quietly kept in the margins. Let them laugh. She wasn't flying for their approval. She didn't carry a chip on her shoulder. She carried something heavier, the weight of proving herself again. Not just to them, but to every pilot who ever looked through her, to every commander who assumed calm meant incapable, and to one man, long gone, who once told her, your instincts will outlive their opinions. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the edge of the horizon. None of them knew what the day would bring, but Lauren Creed already felt it in her bones. The kind of silence that only comes before something breaks wide open. 0547 hours. The sound came sharp and sudden. A high-pitched klaxon tore through the early morning quiet like a blade through silk. Lauren Creed was already halfway through lacing her boots. No hesitation, no panic. Just motion. Precise, focused, automatic. She'd felt the shift in the air before. The kind that makes the sky feel heavier. The kind you don't explain, you just react to. She stepped into the hallway as other pilots emerged from their quarters in a blur of uniforms, gear, and adrenaline. Some still wiping sleep from their eyes. Others alert, but uncertain. The intercom crackled. "All pilots, report to briefing room. This is not a drill." Those words landed like a punch. It wasn't the urgency in the voice. It was the absence of one phrase, training exercise. That meant one thing: real casualties, real chaos, real decisions. By the time Creed entered the briefing room, the energy inside was on a knife's edge. About 24 aviators filled the space, hunched over steaming coffee or pacing in full flight gear. At the front of the room stood Colonel Rourke, tall, rigid, always too still when things were about to break. He pointed to the glowing tactical display behind him, satellite imagery of a mountainous region lined with blinking red zones. His jaw was clenched. His voice was sandpaper. As of 0430, Bravo Battalion was conducting a scheduled patrol near the Khyber Valley. They were ambushed. The enemy deployed overlapping SAM arrays here, and here, he said, stabbing at the map. We believe they were baited in. It's the largest coordinated enemy movement we've seen in years. They're trapped, 500 of them, surrounded. The room fell into dead silence. Rourke stepped back from the screen. He didn't ask for questions. He didn't soften the numbers. He just delivered the next blow. 3 helicopters have already gone down. 1 Chinook, 2 Blackhawks. Last contact reported hostile fire from multiple altitudes. No ground exfil possible. Air support's the only option. A pilot in the corner muttered something under his breath. "Why not bomb them out?" Colonel Rourke heard him. "Because civilians live in those surrounding villages. If we carpet bomb this valley, we won't just lose our men. We'll start an international crisis." He let that sink in. This needs to be surgical. Extraction only. Nap of the earth flying. Maximum precision. Minimum visibility. And full acceptance of the risk. His next words hit harder than any explosion. "This is a volunteer mission. I'm not ordering anyone into what's almost certainly a one-way flight." Silence again. Not the respectful kind. The terrified kind. Eyes dropped to boots. Pens clicked nervously. The whir of cooling fans from the tactical screen filled the vacuum where courage was supposed to speak. Lauren Creed sat 3 rows back, hands steady, eyes fixed. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to, because she already knew. No one else was going to stand. Not Captain Merrick, the combat king of their rotation. Not Lieutenant Shaw, who bragged every weekend about his Top Gun reflexes. Not even Rourke himself, though Lauren suspected the old man wanted nothing more than to take the stick again. 30 seconds passed, then 40. The silence became shameful, so she stood. No drama, no speech, just a calm, solid voice. "I'll fly it." Heads turned. The room shifted. Someone scoffed. Captain Merrick didn't even try to hide his disbelief. "You serious, Creed? This isn't supply drop territory. This is a goddamn meat grinder." "I'm aware." "You've logged what? Recon and logistics? That valley's going to spit you out in pieces." Lauren didn't blink. "Maybe, but someone has to go, and none of you are standing." The words weren't meant as a challenge, but they landed like one. Another pilot, Lieutenant Granger, muttered under his breath, "This is suicide." "So was Normandy," Lauren shot back. Colonel Rourke's eyes met hers. He said nothing for a moment, then finally a short nod. "Creed, take Apache 77 Alpha. She's fitted with the latest countermeasures. If anything can punch through, it's that bird." "Copy." As she turned to leave, Merrick's voice followed her out. "You'll be dead in 20 minutes. She paused at the doorway, not turning around. Then make it 30. You'll need the extra time to find your spine. The door shut behind her with a finality that echoed. Outside, the base was already alive. Ground crews sprinted across the tarmac. Fuel trucks hissed. Helicopters thumped and growled as engines spun up. Lauren walked straight toward her aircraft. Apache 77 Alpha sat like a dormant predator. Low, lean, and scarred from years of missions no one had wanted. Fitting. Her co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Nia Vega, met her at the nose. "Ma'am," Vega said, "I want in." "You sure?" "I've got skin in this too. That battalion? My cousin's squad is out there." Lauren hesitated, then nodded. They strapped in. No goodbyes, no prayers, only motion. From the tower. "Guardian Angel, you are cleared for immediate launch." And then the Apache lifted, skimming 50 feet above the ground, banking hard into the mountains and vanishing into a valley that had already swallowed 3 helicopters and now waited hungry for one more. You'll never know who you are until silence surrounds you, until the room of warriors stays seated and your legs still move. When leadership hesitates, courage isn't loud. It's the sound of one boot step forward. The Apache roared as it cut through the pre-dawn haze. A machine born of war, humming low above the earth like a beast held on a tight leash. The terrain below was rugged, all jagged ridge lines and dust-colored cliffs, scarred by years of conflict. And ahead, buried between 2 mountain spines, was the valley, the place they called a death bowl on the mission map. Captain Lauren Creed leaned forward in the cockpit, eyes scanning the data. Her fingers never left the controls. Warrant Officer Nia Vega sat to her right, calm, efficient, sharp as a scalpel. "Telemetry holding," Vega said, adjusting her helmet mic. "Sam sights cold for now." "They won't stay that way," Lauren replied. "They're watching." There was no room for nerves in the cockpit. Not now. Not with 500 soldiers bleeding into that valley floor. "First run in." Guardian Angel made her approach from the east, flying nap of the earth, hugging terrain at under 50 feet, the only way to avoid radar lock. Vega juggled radio chatter with Bravo Battalion, weapon systems, and terrain telemetry all at once. Her voice was steel even as chaos flooded the comms. "Guardian Angel, this is Bravo 6. We've got incoming. Mortar fire on grid Delta. Tracers over LZ. Can you confirm extract window?" "Copy, Bravo 6, Lauren replied. "We're 4 mics out. Prep walking wounded." They crested the final hill. Then the sky lit up. 3 surface-to-air missiles launched in quick succession, their smoke trails carving vicious arcs into the pale morning. "Missiles inbound," Vega barked. Creed threw the bird left, yanking the controls into a brutal spiral. G-forces pinned her into her seat as she deployed flares and chaff. "Decoys out!" 1 missile veered off. The second exploded midair. The third kept coming. "Third still tracking." Lauren dropped the Apache into a narrow ravine, blades nearly kissing the rock walls. The missile clipped the ridge above them and detonated behind in a thundercrack. First landing. The LZ was chaos, smoke, gunfire, and screaming. Bravo soldiers poured from the tree line toward the Apache, 8 at a time. Bullets pinged off the fuselage. "We're hot," Vega shouted. 5 seconds max on the ground." The first group of soldiers scrambled aboard, dragging 2 wounded men behind them. Vega grabbed one by the collar and hauled him into the bird. "We're full! Go!" Creed didn't need a second signal. She yanked the Apache off the ground with a roar and rocketed back toward the safe zone. Back at base, they didn't shut down the engines. No time. The crew chief slammed fresh ammo into the pods while fuel hoses hissed like snakes under pressure. Second run. They were back in the air before anyone finished strapping down the ammo crates. "How many on the ground?" Creed asked. "Still over 400, Vega said, scanning a fresh report. "And we're losing time. Enemies closing from the west." Creed didn't reply. Her silence said everything. Second landing. They came in low, even lower this time, skimming treetops, bouncing through the turbulence of their own rotor wash. More wounded soldiers waited, their eyes wide in disbelief. "That's the same damn bird," one muttered. "Didn't they say she went down?" "Move!" a sergeant shouted. "She's not here to chat." As they loaded, an RPG exploded 20 feet from the landing zone. The Apache rocked violently. "We're taking indirect," Vega snapped. "We have to move." Lauren pushed the throttle. The bird screamed upward, engine stress warnings flashing red across her HUD. But she didn't ease up. Third run. Sam's came earlier this time. Creed dodged two, but the third grazed the tail. "Tail's damaged," Vega called out. "Stability compromised, but controllable." Lauren kept flying. They landed again. More soldiers. More screams. More blood. "That's 24, Vega said. 24 out of 500. Back at base, command begged her to stop. "You've made 3 runs, Colonel Rourke said through her comms. "That's more than anyone had the guts to try. We'll regroup. Wait for air cover." "There's no time," Creed replied. "I don't need regrouping. I need fuel." She cut the feed before he could argue. Fourth, fifth, sixth. The cockpit began to feel smaller, hotter. Vega's knuckles were raw from gripping the edges of her console. Each run brought new damage. Bullet holes, warning lights. One time, half the left side countermeasure system failed, and they flew through direct fire blind. "This isn't flying," Vega muttered. "This is threading death with a toothpick." Lauren didn't respond. She was locked in, one with the machine now. By the 8th run, her voice was hoarse. Her hands were blistered through the gloves. Vega had wrapped a field dressing around her forearm after catching a fragment during loading. And yet, they kept going. This wasn't just flying into combat. This was flying into silence, into every excuse made by those who stayed seated, into the vacancy left behind by men who measured courage with rank and ribbon, but not action. They weren't flying toward war. They were flying into the space where bravery had failed and filling it by force. 10 runs, then 15. By the time they reached run 17, Vega's voice cracked for the first time. "How long do you think we can keep this up?" Creed's reply came slow. "Long enough." And somewhere in that valley, beneath fire and fear, 500 men watched the sky. They didn't know her name, but they began to believe. Trip 25. The sky had changed. It was darker now. Not because of the time, but because of the smoke. The entire ridgeline west of the valley was on fire. Missile trails and burning wreckage painting it like a battlefield ripped from hell itself. Captain Lauren Creed's voice was quieter now, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Her jaw was clenched, her throat raw. Warrant Officer Vega hadn't spoken in the last minute. She was too focused on the flickering radar that refused to settle. "Last run was rough," Vega finally muttered. "I think they're baiting us. They're learning our rhythm." "Then we break it," Creed replied. "Change approach vector, low entry, hard right dive." "That's insane. So is flying 36 times into a kill zone." There was no room left for caution. They banked right, skimming over a ravine and hugging the terrain tighter than they ever had before. Vega leaned into her screen, Creed into the stick. The helicopter danced like it had a mind of its own, and for the first time in hours it felt like the Apache trusted her back. Then the missile came. No warning, no radar lock. Just a flash of fire and a deafening roar. Impact. The Apache bucked violently. Alarms screamed across the cockpit. Lights flared. The control stick jerked in Creed's hand. "We're hit!" Vega yelled. "Tail rotor's gone. Complete failure." The helicopter began to spin, not gradually but violently, whipping in an uncontrollable spiral. In most scenarios, this is the end. Without the tail rotor, an Apache is done. The torque of the main rotor sends the entire craft spinning out of control. There's no graceful crash. There's only a descent you don't walk away from. But Lauren Creed didn't freeze. She leaned into the spin. Using cyclic inputs, precise, sharp movements, she countered the torque manually, redirecting the lift of the main rotor to push against the spin. Not enough to stabilize fully, but enough to slow it. The Apache was no longer a war machine. It was a wounded animal, one bleeding from its back, disoriented and wild, and she was whispering it back to life. They hit the valley floor hard. Dirt exploded around them. The skids dug deep into the mud. The tail dragged, scraped, crumpled. But they survived. The rotor spun down. Smoke filled the cockpit. "You okay?" Creed asked. Vega groaned. Her helmet cracked. "I think so. You?" "Alive." They both looked at the status display. It was bad. The tail was nearly detached. Hydraulics compromised, fuel down to 40%. This bird's not flying again, Vega whispered. Creed didn't respond. She stared at the controls like a surgeon refusing to call time of death. Outside, Bravo 6 was still calling for help. Guardian Angel, do you read? We saw the hit. Are you down? Over. Guardian Angel copies, Creed replied, coughing smoke from her lungs. Aircraft is damaged. On the ground, but not out. Negative, Angel. Hold position. We're sending a squad to extract. No, Creed said firmly. You need every man on that perimeter. You're not flying that thing. Watch me. She began assessing damage with her bare hands. The tail rotor was gone, twisted metal and hanging cables. But the main rotor, transmission, and avionics were intact. I think I can hover, she said. No translation control, but if I use the main rotor dish for lateral push. You're talking about flying a spinning blade through enemy fire without anti-torque control, Vega said. That's not flying. That's gambling. Then let's raise the stakes. Trip 26. They jerry-rigged the controls, removed all unnecessary weight. Creed throttled up slowly, listening not to the instruments, but to the feel of the machine. It vibrated violently, but it lifted. The Apache rose off the ground like a stubborn spirit refusing to be buried. It spun, but not wildly, not dangerously. Creed leaned into the spin, shifted the cyclic, adjusted the torque with microsecond precision. Bravo 6 watched from the valley. Men who had already accepted death. Men who thought the angels had stopped flying. And then they heard the rotors again, saw the chopper spinning, scarred, crooked, tail aflame, but flying. That can't be real, one soldier whispered. She's back, another said. How the hell? Doesn't matter, she's back. They loaded more wounded. 8 men, no hesitation. We're overloaded, Vega warned. So is the sky, but it's holding. They took off again, spinning, bucking, barely maintaining altitude. Flight time? Creed asked. 14 minutes to base, Vega replied. If we survive. Let's aim for 15. Back at base, emergency crews stared upward, waiting. The helicopter staggered into the clearing like a boxer on his last legs. Flames kissed its rear fuselage. Landing skids crooked, armor dented, but it landed. Ma'am, a young mechanic said, running to the cockpit. This aircraft shouldn't be able to fly. Creed looked up, blood on her cheek, sweat in her eyes. Then I guess it didn't get the memo. 10 more runs, each one harder, each one riskier. By trip 31, they were flying with no nav screen. By trip 34, one of the weapon mounts tore loose mid-flight. By trip 35, the cockpit filled with smoke mid-hover. But Creed didn't stop. Every aircraft has a limit. Every body has a threshold. But will is the one thing the manuals don't measure. Somewhere past gravity, past physics, past rational thought, there's flight. And that's where Creed lived. Not in the numbers, but in the impossible. On trip 36, the last group of soldiers climbed aboard. Some injured, some crying, all silent. As the helicopter lifted one final time, one of the men looked at Lauren and whispered, "We thought you were a ghost." Creed didn't reply. She just flew. The hangar was quiet when she landed the last time. No cheers, no band, no flags waving. Just the dull clunk of the landing skids scraping against the scorched tarmac and the sudden silence when the rotors finally slowed. Captain Lauren Creed sat still in the cockpit, her fingers still gripping the controls even as the vibrations faded. Her helmet was streaked with soot and sweat. The console lights were dead. Warning panels still blinked faintly like dying embers. Warrant Officer Nia Vega sat beside her, head bowed, eyes closed, exhausted but alive. Across the airstrip, the 500 soldiers they'd brought back stood in rows, some leaning on stretchers, some with their uniforms torn and burned. Most had no idea who flew them out, but they were watching now, and they knew. Lauren climbed out of the Apache with slow, deliberate steps. Each muscle in her body screamed. Her boots hit the ground like anvils. Her flight suit was torn across the shoulder where shrapnel had grazed her on trip 28. Her left glove was missing. She didn't head toward the medics. She didn't collapse into a chair. She walked straight across the tarmac. Inside the pilot lounge, the air was stale and cold. The room had fallen silent the second she opened the door. Captain Merrick stood at the far end, arms folded, staring into nothing, or perhaps waiting for this moment. A few other pilots shifted awkwardly, unable to meet her eyes. No one spoke. Lauren walked in slowly, her steps measured but steady, stopping 3 feet from Merrick. She didn't raise her voice. "Captain Merrick," she said, voice hoarse but clear, "I believe you owe me something." He didn't speak at first. His eyes flicked up. For the first time truly seeing her. Not the rank, not the uniform. Her, the woman who flew into death 36 times and came back. Not out of ego, not out of rage, but because no one else did. Merrick's jaw clenched. He nodded once. Not out of obligation, but out of recognition. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to his temple and saluted. Not because the rules demanded it, but because he finally understood what it meant to earn it. Lauren held his gaze a moment longer, then returned the salute. Brief, minimal, but undeniable. No smugness, no satisfaction, just truth, the kind that doesn't need applause. She turned to leave. No one stopped her. Outside, the hangar bay doors creaked open to reveal the Apache, now grounded permanently. Flames had kissed her tail, armor riddled with holes, one rotor blade twisted like a broken wing. A young mechanic stood beside it, wide-eyed. "Ma'am," he said, almost whispering, "this aircraft shouldn't be able to fly." Lauren looked at him. Her voice was quiet, almost a murmur. "That's the funny thing about shouldn't." She walked past the wreckage without looking back. 3 months later, in the rose garden of the White House, Lauren Creed stood in full dress uniform, her medals polished, her shoulders squared, but her expression unchanged. The president pinned the Medal of Honor on her chest. Cameras clicked. Speeches were made. The citation read, "For extraordinary courage, flawless instinct, and refusal to abandon any soldier, even when the skies themselves turned against her." But Creed wasn't listening to the words. She was listening to the wind, to the engine hum she still heard in her bones, to the silence of the ones who never came back. In the end, there was no headline loud enough, no medal heavy enough to explain what she carried into that valley. Respect isn't shouted. It isn't given in ceremony. It's earned in silence, under fire, with no one watching. They used to define a pilot by flight hours, by altitude, by the number of successful landings, by how many buttons you could press in a crisis without blinking. But after Captain Lauren Creed flew a broken Apache 36 times into a hellscape no one else would enter, those definitions began to feel small. She didn't rewrite the flight manual. She made it irrelevant. What she flew with wasn't just a machine. It was instinct, grit, and something you can't teach in a simulator. She flew through doubt, through the silence of command, through every side glance and whispered remark that said she didn't belong. And she came back not to prove them wrong, but to prove someone could. She never once raised her voice. She didn't need to, because in a war zone that chewed up steel and spit out names to be forgotten, she became something they couldn't ignore. Today, new cadets walk past a photo of her in the Flight Academy hallway. Not because regulations require it, but because they asked for it. And every now and then, a young woman stares at that photo a little longer, then walks into the hangar with her head a little higher. And maybe that's the real lesson here, that sometimes courage doesn't wear a cape. Sometimes it wears a flight suit soaked in sweat, flying a broken machine into the impossible, again and again, not for glory, but because others were counting on her. In a world today where noise often speaks louder than action, where likes and titles sometimes matter more than sacrifice and silence, stories like Captain Lauren Creed's remind us what leadership really is. It's not the loudest voice in the room. It's the one who stands up when everyone else sits still. Maybe you've known someone like her, a grandmother who worked 2 jobs and never asked for thanks, a neighbor who served quietly and never told you what they saw overseas. Or maybe, just maybe, you've been that person and the world simply didn't notice. So let's change that. In the comments, tell us, who's the Lauren Creed in your life? Or better yet, What does your definition of courage look like today? We'd love to hear your story. And if this one moved you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in grit, quiet strength, and the kind of heroism that doesn't need to shout. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for remembering that sometimes the most powerful flight begins where everyone else gave up. We'll see you in the next story.